You probably remember the food chain from school, right? The plant gets eaten by the grasshopper gets eaten by the toad, and you know how it goes. It's this nice, simple line. But have you ever stopped and wondered about the big question that simple chain never really answers?
I mean, seriously, why not? Why don't we have ecosystems with 20 different predators stacked on top of each other? What's the rule that stops it? Well, to figure that out, we've got to zoom out from that one little chain and look at the hidden architecture of the entire ecosystem. Okay, let's get into it. So the first, most straightforward way to try and map an ecosystem is to just count everything. You know, how many plants are there? How many bugs? How many birds? And this gives us our very first tool, what we call the number pyramid.
The whole idea here is pretty simple. Each level of the food chain is called a trophic level. So at the very bottom, you've got your producers. That's plants, making their own food from the sun. Then the level above them, those are the primary consumers, the herbivores munching on the plants. And then you have the secondary consumers eating them, and so on up the ladder. You're basically building a little census of the ecosystem, level by level.
And check this out. In a classic grassland, this works perfectly. In just 1 square meter, you might have about 1,000 plants. Those plants are supporting maybe 200 crickets. Those crickets feed about 30 birds. And right at the top, those 30 birds can only support 3 hawks. See that beautiful pyramid shape? The numbers get smaller and smaller as you go up. It just makes sense.
So it seems like we've cracked it, right? Lots of producers at the bottom, very few predators at the top. Case closed. But what happens when the ecosystem doesn't look like a nice, neat grassland? Does just counting things always give us this perfect pyramid? And boom, here's the catch. Think about an entire ecosystem built around one single massive tree. That's just one producer at the base. But that one tree can be home to thousands of insects eating its leaves. And those thousands of insects might support tens of thousands of even smaller parasites. All of a sudden, our neat pyramid is totally flipped on its head. So clearly, just counting individuals isn't the fundamental rule we're looking for. Okay, so counting is out, it's not reliable. But what if, instead of counting them, we weighed them? Let's try to measure the total amount of living stuff, the biomass, at each level. This brings us to our second kind of pyramid. Biomass is really just the total weight of all the living organisms in a level if you were to dry them all out. So instead of one tree versus 1,000 insects, we're now comparing the total weight of that tree to the total weight of all those insects combined. And you know what? This is a much better system. The total biomass of that one giant tree is way, way more than the biomass of all the little insects on it. Problem solved. Our pyramid is upright again. But we're still not there. In some oceans or lakes, the producers are teeny tiny phytoplankton. They reproduce incredibly fast and get eaten just as quickly. So at any given moment, the total weight of the tiny animals eating them can actually be greater than the weight of the phytoplankton themselves. So even the biomass pyramid can get flipped. We still haven't found the unbreakable law.
All right, we've tried counting, we've tried weighing, and both methods have exceptions. It's time to stop looking at the stuff and start looking at the one thing that flows through every ecosystem in only one direction. The one thing that can't be inverted: energy.
And this is it. This is the absolute fundamental rule. Unlike the number of organisms or their total weight, the pyramid of energy is always upright. No exceptions, no tricks. The real question is, why?
The entire secret, the reason for the shape of life on Earth, all comes down to this one number, 10%. This is known as the 10% rule, and it explains everything.
So here's the deal. Plants capture energy from the sun. But when an herbivore eats that plant, it only gets to hang on to about 10% of that energy to build its own body. The other 90%? Well, that gets burned up just by the plant living its life, or it's lost as heat. And this happens at every single step up the food chain.
So, look at how this plays out. If the plants at the bottom have, say, 10,000 units of energy, the insects that eat them only get 1,000 units. The toads that eat the insects only get 100. And the hawk at the top? It gets a measly 10 units of that original energy. A massive 90% of the energy just disappears at every single step. It's like a huge energy tax at each level.
A 90% loss. That is just colossal. It's wildly inefficient. So where does all that energy actually go? Why doesn't it just get passed along?
The scientific name for this process is energy dissipation. And it's not that the energy just vanishes into thin air, it's used by the organism for its own survival, or it's lost in ways that simply can't be eaten. This chart shows it perfectly. Let's take a cow eating grass.
Of all the energy it gets, a huge 60% is just burned for respiration, breathing, moving around, staying warm. Another 30% is lost as waste. That leaves only that tiny 10% slice that's actually stored in its muscles and tissues. That's the only part that a predator can actually get.
And that right there, that solves our original mystery. Why can't a food chain have 20 levels? It's just simple math. After you take that 90% energy tax 4 or 5 times, there's practically no energy left. There's not enough fuel in the system to support another layer of predators. The pyramid just runs out of steam.
Now, once you understand this energy law, it reveals one last really crucial thing about how life is structured. It's not just that food chains have to be short, it's that shorter chains are way, way more efficient.
Just look at this comparison. On the left, you've got a long 5-step chain. By the time the energy gets all the way to that hawk, it's been hit with that 90% tax 4 separate times. Now look at the short chain on the right. A leopard eats an elephant, which eats plants. Because the leopard is so much closer to the original energy from the plants, it gets a much, much bigger and more efficient slice of the energy pie.
So let's just recap what we figured out. We saw that ecological pyramids are a great way to visualize life's structure. We tried counting organisms and weighing them, but found out both of those pyramids can sometimes be upside down. But then we found the one ironclad law, the energy pyramid. It's always upright because of that incredible 10% rule. And that massive energy loss at each step is what limits the length of food chains and proves that shorter food chains are just fundamentally more efficient.
And this isn't just some abstract rule for animals in the wild. This law of energy transfer governs the flow of resources through every single system, and that includes our own. It's a hidden rule shaping the entire planet. So the final question to think about is, how might understanding this rule change the way we think about our own place in the global food chain?